6:47 in the morning, March 6, 1944, altitude 23,000 feet. Sector B, 7 skies over Berlin, occupied Germany. The tail of the B-17G Lady Liberty shakes violently. Every rivet trembles. Every seam groans under the stress of thin air and sub-zero temperatures. Sergeant Michael Donovan is squeezed into the tail turret, his body folded into an impossible position, knees pressed hard against his chest, shoulders hunched forward, spine curved like a question mark. He occupies a cylindrical aluminum coffin measuring just 1.2 meters in diameter. There is no room to stretch, no room to shift position, no room to escape. His hands sweat inside heavy leather gloves despite the freezing cold. He grips the twin handles of the caliber .50 machine guns, fingers wrapped so tight his knuckles have gone white beneath the leather. The viewport directly in front of his face is fogged with condensation from his breath, each exhalation creating a new layer of frost on the already obscured plexiglass. He wipes it with his glove, but the fog returns immediately. Temperature outside reads -40 degrees Celsius. Inside the turret, it's barely warmer. Every breath he takes burns his lungs, the frigid air searing his throat and chest like swallowing shards of ice. Through the partially fogged viewport, 12 black dots appear on the horizon at 6 o'clock position. They're small now, barely visible against the pale blue morning sky, but Donovan's trained eyes recognize them instantly. Messerschmitt, Bf-109G fighters, Germany's finest, the Luftwaffe's elite. They move in perfect coordinated attack formation, 3 groups of 4 aircraft each, stacked in the deadly swarm pattern that has destroyed countless Allied bombers over the past 3 years. They come fast, faster than most people can comprehend. Estimated speed 620 kilometers per hour, which translates to more than 170 meters per second. At that velocity, they cover ground with terrifying efficiency. Donovan's mind does the math automatically, a calculation burned into his brain through months of combat experience and dozens of previous missions. In 90 seconds, maybe less, those 12 fighters will be within lethal range of 400 meters. At that distance, their 20mm cannons and 30mm machine guns become instruments of surgical destruction. The 8th Air Force doctrine is crystal clear on this. Donovan has heard it repeated in every briefing, every training session, every debriefing after missions. Wait until 800 yards. Conserve ammunition. Fire defensive bursts of 3 to 5 seconds maximum. Never waste bullets. Ammunition is heavy, expensive, limited. Every bullet counts. Every tracer must have purpose. Fire discipline separates professional gunners from panicked amateurs. Donovan ignores all of that. His decision is instantaneous, born from experience, from watching friends die, from analyzing what works and what doesn't in the brutal calculus of aerial combat. He rotates the gun turrets using the hand controls, feeling the electric motors strain as they move the heavy weapons into position. The mechanism clicks as he locks the targeting system. His eyes focus on the distant black dots. Distance calculation runs through his mind. 2,400 yards, more than 2,000 meters, more than 20 football fields. Impossible, the word echoes in his training. Nobody hits anything at that distance. Nobody even tries. The physics work against you in every possible way. Wind at this altitude doesn't just blow, it screams across the sky at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, sometimes gusting even higher. Those winds deflect projectiles by up to 7 meters or more over such distances. Ballistic drop at this range is massive, measured in dozens of meters. The mathematical chances of actually hitting a fast-moving fighter at 2,400 yards are less than 0.02%. Statistically zero. It's madness, it's suicide. It's a waste of precious ammunition. Donovan squeezes the trigger anyway. The world explodes into violence. 200 bullets tear through the sky in 3 seconds, a sustained burst that violates every rule in the manual. The caliber .50 Browning M2 machine guns are legendary weapons, each one weighing more than 38 kilograms, capable of firing 850 rounds per minute. But firing them in sustained bursts creates problems. The guns howl with mechanical fury, 300 pounds of metal vibrating violently against his shoulders despite the recoil absorption systems. The sound inside the tail turret is beyond unbearable. It's deafening in a way that transcends normal hearing damage. Donovan feels it in his bones, in his teeth, in his skull. The cacophony of 2 heavy machine guns firing simultaneously in an enclosed metal space creates pressure waves that feel like physical blows. Red tracer rounds cross the sky like spears thrown by angry gods. 1 in every 5 bullets is a tracer, glowing phosphorescent red, designed to show the gunner where his fire is going. They arch through the distance, following the graceful but deadly parabola of ballistic physics, losing altitude as gravity exerts its inexorable pull, but advancing forward with tremendous velocity. Each bullet weighs 43 grams and travels at more than 890 meters per second when it leaves the barrel. But Donovan isn't aiming at the planes. Not directly. That would be foolish at this range. Instead, he's aiming at something far more subtle, far more tactical. He's aiming at the space between them. at the geometric center of their formation, at the invisible zone where coordination happens, where discipline exists, where pilots maintain visual awareness of their wingman and squadron mates. The Bf-109s don't expect this. Nobody expects defensive fire at 2,400 yards. The formation hesitates. It's a subtle thing, barely noticeable to anyone not intimately familiar with fighter tactics. But Donovan sees it immediately. One of the fighters, probably the squadron leader based on position, breaks slightly to the left. Another follows, maintaining formation discipline but adjusting to the leader's movement. A third breaks right, perhaps thinking he sees a better attack angle. Luftwaffe discipline, built on thousands of hours of training, honed through 3 years of brutal aerial combat across multiple fronts, refined through the blood of countless engagements, falters for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds are enough. Donovan fires again. His finger stays pressed on the trigger, ignoring the heat building in the weapon mechanisms, ignoring the ammunition counter spinning down, ignoring every instinct that says conserve, conserve, conserve. 200 more bullets scream through the sky. The machine guns are heating up now, metal expanding from the friction and explosive forces. Tolerance is changing, mechanisms beginning to strain. Smoke rises from the breech mechanisms, acrid and chemical. The smell of burnt gunpowder fills the cramped cabin, overwhelming every other scent, choking and bitter. He can't see right anymore. The viewport is completely fogged now, condensation mixed with gun smoke, creating a nearly opaque barrier. He wipes frantically with his glove, but it's useless. He can barely make out shapes through the murk. He can't breathe right either. The air inside the turret is thick with powder smoke, each breath bringing less oxygen and more chemical irritation. His lungs burn from cold and contamination, but he keeps firing. Keep pouring lead into that space, into that zone, into the volume of air that the German formation must traverse to reach their attack position. One Bf-109 flies directly into the river of tracers. Perhaps the pilot didn't see them coming through the glare of the morning sun. Perhaps he was focused on maintaining formation position and didn't notice until too late. Perhaps he saw them but calculated wrong, thinking he could slip through the gaps between individual bullets. Whatever the reason, the result is catastrophic. The fighter's DB605 engine explodes in a brilliant flash of orange fire. 12 cylinders, producing 1,475 horsepower one moment, a expanding ball of flaming fuel and shredded metal the next. Metal fragments fly in all directions like shrapnel from a grenade. The cowling tears away. The propeller, spinning at more than 2,700 revolutions per minute, suddenly loses its connection to the engine. The right wing detaches at the root, severed by multiple bullet impacts that shattered the main spar. The Bf-109 enters a death spiral, a flat spin from which no recovery is possible at this altitude. It plummets, leaving a trail of black smoke cutting through the pale blue sky like a wound in the heavens. Donovan watches it fall for 3 seconds before it disappears below the bomber formation. Still spinning, still trailing smoke, carrying its pilot to certain death 23,000 feet below. 11 remain, but something has changed. Something fundamental. The remaining German pilots have just witnessed something they didn't think was possible. A tail gunner firing at impossible range, a defensive position acting aggressively, tactics they didn't train for, a threat they didn't anticipate. They're scared now, not panicked. These are professional pilots, veterans of countless engagements, but definitely unsettled. The mathematical certainty of their attack plan has just been violently disrupted, and that's when everything really begins. 3 years earlier, November 1941, Brooklyn, New York. Michael Francis Donovan was 19 years old and possessed exactly zero prospects for a future that didn't involve manual labor and poverty. He was the third son in a family of Irish immigrants who worked the Brooklyn docks, part of a community where your destiny was often determined by your father's occupation. His grandfather loaded ships, his father loaded ships, his older brothers loaded ships. The expectation was clear. Michael would load ships. He had dropped out of James Madison High School halfway through his sophomore year. Not because he was stupid, his grades were actually decent, but because his family needed the money. His father's back was giving out after 25 years of hauling cargo. Someone had to help support the family. At 16, Michael joined the longshoremen, doing the brutal work that broke men's bodies before they turned 50. $52 a week, paid in cash every Friday afternoon. He loaded crates of sewing machines manufactured in Pennsylvania, hauled 100-pound sacks of flour from Kansas wheat fields, shifted bales of cotton from southern plantations. The work destroyed his hands, covering them with calluses thick as leather. His back developed a permanent ache by the time he was 18. His future stretched ahead of him, perfectly visible, perfectly predictable, perfectly bleak. 40 more years of this, if his body held out that long, then retirement with a broken body and minimal pension. The war seemed impossibly distant. Europe was burning. That much was clear from the newspaper headlines Michael read during lunch breaks, sitting on dock pilings while eating salami sandwiches his mother packed. London under bombardment from German aircraft, entire cities reduced to rubble. German panzer tanks rolling across the Russian steppe in Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Rommel's Afrika Korps fighting British forces across North African deserts. It was interesting in an abstract way. Tragic, certainly, but it was also very, very far from Brooklyn. The war belonged to someone else, somewhere else, some other life. December 7, 1941 changed everything. Changed it for the nation. Changed it for Michael Donovan. Pearl Harbor. 2,403 American servicemen killed in a single morning. The Pacific Fleet burning in Hawaiian harbors, battleships capsized, destroyers destroyed, aircraft obliterated on the ground before they could even take off. The impossible had happened. America, safe behind two vast oceans, had been attacked, violently, deliberately, lethally. The next day, December 8, President Roosevelt addressed Congress. His voice came through radios in every home, every bar, every shop in America. A date which will live in infamy. The declaration of war followed immediately. The enlistment lines formed within hours. They stretched for entire blocks in every American city. Young men, old men, middle-aged men, all standing in lines that wound around buildings, waiting for their chance to sign up, to fight back, to do something. Michael Donovan stood in one of those lines. He waited 6 hours in cold December rain for his turn at the enlistment desk. But he wasn't motivated by patriotic fervor or burning desire for revenge against Japan. His reasons were simpler, more personal, more practical. For the first time in his life, there was something he could do that didn't involve loading boxes for minimum wage. The military offered training, opportunity, purpose, maybe even a future beyond the docks. The Army classification officer looked at Michael's physical profile and made a quick decision. Height, 5 feet 7 inches. Weight, 148 pounds. Vision 20/20ths in both eyes. Reflexes above average based on coordination tests. The verdict, suitable for service as aircraft gunnery crew. Translation. His small frame made him perfect for squeezing into the cramped gun turrets of bombers. Not prestigious like being a pilot, not glamorous like being a navigator, but essential. Bombers needed gunners, lots of them. The casualty rates demanded constant replacement. 16 weeks of training at Fort Myers, Florida, starting January 1942. The weather was warm, almost tropical compared to Brooklyn winters, but the training was brutal in different ways. Learning to disassemble and reassemble Browning M2 caliber .50 machine guns, at first with vision, then blindfolded while instructors shouted at you and threw obstacles in your way. Target practice on moving targets pulled by boats offshore. Simulations in rotating turrets mounted on vibrating platforms designed to approximate the conditions inside a bomber at altitude under enemy fire. The instructors were veterans, many of them having served in earlier conflicts or as advisors to British forces. They taught the doctrine with religious fervor. Conserve ammunition, fire in short controlled bursts, wait until enemies are within effective range. Discipline above all. But nobody mentioned certain realities. Nobody talked about what -40°C actually feels like when you're cramped in a metal tube for hours. Nobody explained the psychological impact of watching other bombers explode mid-flight, knowing your friends are inside. Nobody mentioned that the life expectancy of a tail gunner in active combat over Germany was 17 missions. After that, statistics suggested you'd be dead, captured, or too wounded to continue. These were truths learned only through experience. And Michael Donovan was about to get plenty of experience. June 1943, Thurlow Air Base, England. Flat expanse of farmland converted into an American military installation, complete with runways, hangars, barracks, and all the infrastructure needed to support heavy bomber operations. Sergeant Michael Donovan, now 21 years old and no longer the dock worker from Brooklyn, was assigned to the 306th Bombardment Group, 8th Air Force. This unit had a reputation. First, over Germany, they called themselves, having flown some of the earliest American bombing missions against Nazi-occupied Europe. The unit insignia showed a bomb falling on a swastika. The unofficial motto was grimmer: we lead, others follow, some don't come back. The B-17G, designated as Lady Liberty, became Donovan's home, his workspace, his potential tomb. The Flying Fortress, as the B-17 was nicknamed, measured more than 22 meters in length with a wingspan exceeding 31 meters. It carried a crew of 10 men: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, a flight engineer who also manned the top turret, radio operator, 2 waist gunners, ball turret, gunner, and tail gunner. That last position belonged to Donovan. The aircraft carried 2,700 kilograms of bombs in its internal bay, enough explosive power to obliterate city blocks. For self-defense, it bristled with 11 caliber .50 machine guns positioned to cover every angle of approach. 2 in the chin turret, 2 in the top turret, 2 in the ball turret hanging beneath the fuselage, 1 in each waist position, 2 in the tail turret. Together, these weapons could theoretically put out devastating defensive fire. In practice, the reality was more complicated. They flew missions against targets with names that became infamous. Schweinfurt, home to Germany's ball-bearing industry. Regensburg, where Messerschmitt fighters were manufactured. The synthetic oil refineries that converted German coal into fuel for tanks and aircraft. Every mission followed the same terrifying pattern: pre-dawn briefing, takeoff in darkness, formation assembly over England, the long flight into hostile airspace, fighter attacks, flak fields, the bomb run, the even longer flight home, landing, counting how many didn't return. The losses were staggering, almost incomprehensible. On August 17, 1943, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission sent 376 B-17s against those two targets. 60 bombers failed to return. That's 16% losses in a single day. 600 men killed, wounded, or captured. Some crews had to fly through the debris of bombers that had just exploded ahead of them in formation. Some watched parachutes on fire as German fighters deliberately shot escaping crew members. Donovan saw things during those months that civilians couldn't imagine. He saw a B-17 take a direct flak hit that detonated the bomb bay, the entire aircraft simply ceasing to exist in a massive explosion. He saw fighters make head-on passes, their cannon fire literally sawing bombers in half. He saw damaged bombers drop out of formation, crippled and vulnerable, only to be swarmed by German fighters like sharks attacking wounded prey. And through all of this, he learned, he studied, he analyzed. Every mission provided data. Every attack revealed patterns. Every loss taught lessons, if you were willing to learn them. The revelation that changed everything came in December 1943. Mission number 17 for Donovan's crew. Target: industrial facilities in the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland, sometimes called the Forge of the Reich because so much war material was manufactured there. 16 Bf-109s attacked from 6 o'clock low position. The approach was textbook Luftwaffe, executed with precision that came from years of combat experience. The fighters dove through the bomber formation from slightly below, a difficult angle for most defensive guns to cover effectively. They targeted the vulnerable belly of the bombers where armor was thinnest. They fired their 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns in concentrated bursts at close range, then broke downward into steep dives, using gravity and speed to escape before defensive fire could track them effectively. Fast, efficient, lethal. The entire attack from initial contact to final break took less than 15 seconds per fighter. Donovan followed protocol exactly. He had learned the doctrine, believed in the doctrine, trusted the men who wrote the doctrine. He waited until the fighters close to 800 yards. He fired short controlled bursts of 3 to 5 seconds. He tracked his targets carefully, leading them properly, compensating for closure rates and deflection angles. He scored a hit. One Bf-109 took bullets in the wing. The fighter pulled away, trailing smoke, damaged but not destroyed. The pilot would likely make it back to base. The aircraft would be repaired, and the same fighter might attack another formation the next week. The other 15 German fighters passed through the formation mostly unscathed. Their cannons and machine guns poured destructive fire into the B-17s. Donovan watched 2 bombers from the 306th go down. The first took an engine hit that started an uncontrollable fire. The crew bailed out, 9 parachutes blossoming, but over Germany that meant capture, not rescue. The second bomber's wing simply folded, overstressed by battle damage and aerodynamic forces. It fell like a stone. No parachutes. No survivors. 20 men, 10 in each bomber. 20 human beings who woke up that morning, ate breakfast, attended briefing, climbed into their aircraft, fully expecting to return for dinner. Now they were gone, dead or captured. Either way, removed from the war. That night, Donovan couldn't sleep. The barracks held 40 bunks, 20 on each side, but felt emptier than it should. 2 crews weren't coming back. The bunks would be stripped, personal effects packed and shipped to families back home, and new crews would eventually fill those spaces. The cycle continued. Donovan lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to other gunners snore or cry quietly in the darkness or pray in whispers. His mind ran through the engagement over and over, replaying it from different angles, analyzing what happened and why. The math was brutally simple. If he had fired earlier, the German formation might have broken apart before reaching optimal attack position. If the coordination had been disrupted, their fire would have been less concentrated, less effective. Maybe those 2 B-17s would still be flying. Maybe those 20 men would still be alive. But the doctrine said, wait, conserve ammunition. Fire only when within effective range. The doctrine was written by men with ranks and experience. Men who studied aerial warfare scientifically. Men who understood ballistics and tactics. The doctrine represented collective wisdom. The doctrine was also written by men in offices in England and America. Men who flew desks instead of combat missions. Men who never experienced the terror of watching trace of fire converge on your position while you're trapped in a metal tube with nowhere to run. Donovan made a decision that night. It wasn't emotional or impulsive. It was calculated, based on observation and analysis. The defensive doctrine was failing. The casualty rates proved it. Something had to change. Next time, he would shoot first. He would fire at ranges the doctrine said were impossible. He would trade ammunition, which was replaceable, For time, which wasn't. He would attack instead of defending. He would become a hunter instead of prey. March 5, 1944. Mission briefing at 5:30 hours. Still dark outside. The English winter morning cold and damp. The briefing room held crews from multiple squadrons. More than 300 men crowded onto wooden benches, all facing a large map covered by a curtain. The intelligence officer began the ritual. "Good morning, gentlemen." The curtain pulled back, revealing the mission route marked with red ribbon. Collective groan from the assembled crews. Berlin. The ribbon went all the way to Berlin. Target details. Erkner Industrial Complex on the eastern outskirts of the German capital. The facility produced precision components for aircraft engines. Destroying it would impact German fighter production for months. Strategic value extremely high. Difficulty equally high. Expected opposition heavy in all categories. Flak concentrations along the entire route, especially around Berlin itself, where more than 1,000 anti-aircraft guns defended the Reich's capital. Fighter opposition, maximum effort expected from the Luftwaffe. Intelligence indicated elite units had been pulled from other fronts and concentrated around Berlin. Jagdgeschwader 3, 26, and 54. These weren't training units or second-line defenders. These were veteran squadrons with pilots who had 50 victories, 80 victories, some aces with more than 100 confirmed kills. "You're going to face the best they have," the intelligence officer said. His voice met. His job was to inform, not to sugarcoat. Maintain formation integrity. Follow all protocols, execute your assignments, and come back home. The weather officer gave his report. Clear skies over Germany, unlimited visibility, perfect bombing weather, also perfect hunting weather for German fighters. No clouds to hide in, no weather to use as cover. Just open sky and whatever protection the formation itself could provide. The bomber formations would assemble over England after takeoff, then cross the English Channel in massive groups, more than 300 B-17s altogether from multiple bomb groups. P-51 Mustang fighters would escort as far as their fuel allowed, but maximum escort range was still less than the distance to Berlin. There would be a gap, roughly 40 minutes, when the bombers would be alone over hostile territory without fighter cover. That gap was when the Luftwaffe typically attacked in force. Dismissed breakfast, equipment check, final preparations. Takeoff at 6:15. The B-17G Lady Liberty, loaded with fuel and bombs, weighing more than 30,000 kilograms, rolled down the runway at the four Wright R1820 engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, strained to accelerate the massive aircraft to the 95 miles per hour needed for liftoff. The runway seemed to go on forever, the end approaching fast, every crew member silently calculating whether they'd make it. Finally, mercifully, the wheels lifted. They were airborne. Formation assembly took an hour. 36 bombers from the 306th Bomb Group circled over pre-designated points, gradually coming together in the staggered combat box formation that provided maximum defensive fire coverage. When complete, the formation looked like a three-dimensional geometric structure, bombers positioned at different altitudes and horizontal positions, each one able to support others with defensive fire. They crossed the English Channel at 12,000 feet, then began climbing toward combat altitude. The P-51 Mustangs joined them over the French coast, sleek silver fighters taking positions above and around the bomber stream. The sight of friendly fighters was always reassuring, but it wouldn't last. At the German border, the Mustangs waggled their wings in farewell and turned back. Maximum fuel range reached from here forward. The bombers were alone. 6:35 hours. German airspace, 140 kilometers west of Berlin. Altitude 23,000 feet. The sky was crystal clear. Visibility extended to the horizon in every direction. Donovan could see other bomber groups in the distance. Tiny formations of aircraft also heading east toward Berlin. He could see the ground far below, a patchwork of fields and forests and towns. Beautiful morning. Terrible tactical situation. Clear weather meant German radar had detected them the moment they crossed the coast. Ground controllers were tracking the bomber stream's position, altitude, speed, and probable target. Fighter units across Germany were receiving scramble orders. Pilots running to their aircraft. Ground crews working frantically to arm and fuel fighters. Entire squadrons taking off from dispersed airfields. The hunters were coming. Donovan swept the horizon through his viewport methodically, searching for the telltale specks that meant trouble. The radio crackled with routine position reports. Navigator confirming they were on course. Bombardier running checks on the Norden bomb site. Pilot maintaining altitude and indicated airspeed. Everything routine, everything professional. But Donovan knew, somewhere out there, German fighters were positioning for attack. The question wasn't if, but when and from where. The answer came at 6:42 hours. Bandits at 6 o'clock high. The voice of the top turret gunner, Sergeant Thomas Walsh, exploded over the intercom with urgent intensity. Count, ... Stand by, ... 12, repeat, 12 enemy fighters. Range approximately 5 miles, altitude 2,000 feet above our position. Donovan rotated his turret and swept the sky behind them, their 12 black dots against the pale blue, clearly visible now. Messerschmitt Bf 109 gigaseconds in classic attack configuration. 3 groups of 4 aircraft each, swarm formation. The finger 4 pattern developed by the Luftwaffe and later copied by every other air force because it worked so effectively. Lead and wingman, second element slightly behind and to the side. Each pilot able to cover his partner while the partner focused on attack. They were positioning for their dive. Textbook, professional, deadly. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Despite the circumstances, Captain Robert Anderson had flown this route before. All gunners, prepare for engagement. Maintain fire discipline. Wait for effective range. Call out your targets. Good luck. Donovan didn't acknowledge. His hands tightened on the machine gun controls. His eyes tracked the German fighters as they completed their positioning. He watched the leader, likely the squadron commander, banked his wings. The signal, all 12 fighters rolled into their attack dive. Here is the continuation with blocks 3 and 4, each approximately 3,000 words. The 12 Bf 109s completed their roll into attack dive, a coordinated movement executed with mechanical precision. From Donovan's perspective in the tail turret, they appeared to accelerate impossibly fast as they transitioned from level flight into the steep downward trajectory that would bring them screaming through the bomber formation. Physics favored the attackers in every way. Gravity added velocity. The dive angle maximized their speed while minimizing exposure time. The morning sun behind them created glare that made targeting difficult for defensive gunners. Everything about the attack was perfect, except for one variable the German pilots hadn't accounted for. Michael Donovan had no intention of playing defense. Distance 2,400 yards. The German fighters were still tiny specks, barely larger than insects against the vast sky. At this range, every manual, every instructor, every experienced gunner would say the same thing. Wait, be patient, let them close, conserve your ammunition for when it matters. Donovan's fingers squeezed the triggers. The twin Browning M2 machine guns erupted with violence that shook the entire tail section. Each weapon fired at 850 rounds per minute when properly maintained, which meant approximately 14 bullets per second from each gun. 28 bullets per second total. In the 3-second burst, Donovan fired 56 rounds of caliber .50 ammunition tore through the sky. But he wasn't done. He kept his finger pressed down. 4 seconds 5-6. The burst extended to nearly 8 seconds before he released pressure. More than 200 rounds expended in a single sustained burst that violated every principle of ammunition conservation. The recoil hammered his shoulders despite the hydraulic recoil absorption systems. Each bullet that fired created an equal and opposite reaction. Thousands of pounds of force transmitted through the gun mounts into his body. His teeth rattled. His vision blurred from the vibration. The noise inside the enclosed tail turret exceeded anything human ears were designed to withstand. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was physical assault. Pressure waves that felt like repeated punches to the chest and head. Red tracer rounds marked every 5th bullet, creating visible streams of fire that arced through the sky. From Donovan's perspective, they looked like laser beams cutting through space. But from the German pilot's perspective, those tracers represented something entirely different. Incoming fire, at impossible range from a supposedly defensive position. The Bf 109 formation wavered. It was subtle. An outside observer might not even notice. But Donovan had studied fighter tactics obsessively during his months of combat. He understood the microscopic adjustments that separated coordinated attack from scattered chaos. The lead fighter, probably the squadron commander based on position, twitched his wings slightly left. Just a tiny correction, maybe adjusting for what he assumed was wind or formation drift. But his wingmen saw the movement and responded instinctively, following his leader as training demanded. The second element of 4 fighters, slightly behind and offset, also adjusted to maintain formation coherence. The third group, seeing the others shift, made their own corrections. In 2 seconds, the perfect geometric attack formation had become slightly less perfect. Spacing increased by meters. Altitude separation changed by feet. Timing shifted by fractions of seconds. Donovan fired again. Another sustained burst. Another 200 rounds pouring into the airspace where the German formation needed to be for their attack to work. He wasn't aiming at individual aircraft. That would be futile at this range. Instead, he aimed at the invisible center of mass around which their coordination existed. The geometric point where formations maintain cohesion. The space where discipline happens. More rounds screamed downrange. More tracers carved red lines through the morning sky. More pressure waves from the Bf 109's dive path encountered incoming fire they hadn't expected. At 1,800 yards, one of the German fighters made a fatal miscalculation. The pilot, seeing tracers but not yet feeling threatened at this distance, maintained his dive angle and speed. Discipline over caution, training over instinct, the Luftwaffe way. 5 caliber .50 bullets, each weighing 43 grams and traveling at more than 850 meters per second. intersected with his aircraft's flight path to struck the left wing, puncturing fuel tanks and severing control cables. 3 hit the engine cowling, one of them finding the perfect angle to penetrate the DB605 engine block. The effect was catastrophic and immediate. The engine didn't just stop, it exploded. 12 cylinders worth of compressed fuel-air mixture detonated simultaneously. The entire front section of the Bf-109 transformed into an expanding fireball of orange and black. Metal fragments, some as large as dinner plates, others as small as coins, flew in every direction at supersonic velocity. The right wing, suddenly experiencing far more lift than the destroyed left side, caused the fighter to snap roll violently. The pilot, if he was still conscious, would have experienced G-forces exceeding human tolerance as his aircraft entered an inverted flat spin. The Bf-109 tumbled from the sky like a broken toy, trailing smoke and flames, falling through 23,000 feet of empty air toward the German landscape below. 11 fighters remained, but the formation was broken. The wingman of the destroyed fighter instinctively broke right, a survival reflex to avoid the debris field. His sudden movement disrupted the second element. Those pilots, trained for mutual support, couldn't maintain attack posture while their formation fractured. Some tried to continue the dive, others attempted to reform. The split-second hesitation destroyed their timing. Donovan tracked the closest group with his turret. The electric motors whined as they rotated the heavy guns. His viewport was almost completely obscured now, fogged from his breath and clouded with gun smoke. He was firing mostly by instinct and memory, using the tracers to guide his aim more than actual visual target acquisition. Distance, 1,400 yards, still extreme, still technically beyond effective range, but no longer impossible. He fired sustained burst 6 seconds, more than 150 rounds. The gun barrels were heating rapidly now, metal expanding, tolerances changing. He could feel the weapons becoming less responsive, the mechanisms straining under sustained use they weren't designed for. 2 more Bf-109s from the second group flew directly through his stream of fire. The first took multiple hits in the fuselage and cockpit area. The plexiglass canopy shattered. The pilot slumped forward against his harness. The fighter, now unpiloted but still moving at more than 600 kilometers per hour, continued its dive trajectory until it collided with its own wingman. The collision happened at closing speeds that exceeded 1,000 kilometers per hour. Both aircraft simply disintegrated. There was no fire, no explosion, just sudden violent transformation from solid aircraft to clouds of debris. Fragments scattered across a cubic kilometer of sky, falling like deadly rain. 9 fighters remained, and now they were scared. Donovan could see it in their flight patterns. The aggression had vanished. The coordinated attack had collapsed completely. Individual fighters now approached from different angles, different altitudes, without mutual support or timing coordination. Some tried to continue the original attack plan. Others broke away to reassess. A few began climbing, abandoning the engagement entirely. The intercom crackled with voices from other gunner positions. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant James Kowalski, called out targets at 5 o'clock low. The waist gunners reported fighters attempting lateral approaches. The top turret engaged a Bf-109 trying to attack from above, but the tail position remained the focus. The German pilots recognized that this tail gunner was different, dangerous. He needed to be eliminated before any successful attack could proceed. 3 Bf-109s coordinated a pincer movement, approaching from 7 o'clock high, 6 o'clock level, and 5 o'clock high simultaneously. The tactic was sound. Force the tail gunner to choose one target, leaving the others free to fire. Donovan chose all 3. He rotated his turret to the 7 o'clock fighter and opened fire. Short burst, just enough to make that pilot flinch and adjust his approach. Then immediate transition to the 6 o'clock fighter, the most dangerous because of direct tail aspect. Longer burst. Force him to brake early or take hits, then quick transition to 5 o'clock. His hands moved with speed that came from muscle memory and adrenaline. The turret motors screamed as they reversed direction repeatedly. His trigger finger released and squeezed in rapid succession. Short burst, long burst, medium burst, each one calculated to disrupt, delay, or destroy. The 6 o'clock fighter took the worst of it. 50 rounds walked through his dive path. The pilot tried to brake, but his speed worked against him. At 700 kilometers per hour, directional changes require time and distance. Physics doesn't negotiate. 20 rounds hit his aircraft. The engine seized. Control surfaces jammed. The Bf-109 rolled inverted and fell. 8 remaining. The 7 o'clock and 5 o'clock fighters both broke off their attacks early, unwilling to press through the defensive fire. No shots fired from their cannons. No damage to the Lady Liberty. Tactically, Donovan had won this exchange without even scoring confirmed kills on those 2. But the ammunition counter was spinning down rapidly. He'd already expended more than 800 rounds. Approximately 1,200 remained. Sounds like a lot until you calculate that at his current rate of fire. That represents less than 90 seconds of continuous shooting, and there were still 8 German fighters circling, looking for openings, waiting for his guns to fall silent. The next attack came from an unexpected angle. One Bf-109, probably piloted by a veteran who recognized the danger, came in from 8 o'clock high, almost directly above the tail position. The angle was terrible for Donovan's turret. He couldn't elevate the guns enough to engage effectively, but the top turret could. Sergeant Walsh opened fire, his twin .50 calibers tracking the diving fighter. The German pilot, focused on the tailgunner threat, didn't react fast enough to the top turret engagement. He took hits along his wing and fuselage, not fatal damage, but enough to force him to break off and assess. 7 remaining, though 1 was damaged and would likely disengage soon. The battle had lasted less than 4 minutes, but it felt like hours. Time becomes distorted during combat. Seconds stretch, minutes compress. The human brain processes information faster under extreme stress, making everything seem to move in slow motion while simultaneously happening too fast to comprehend. Donovan's hands trembled now, not from fear, but from muscle fatigue and adrenaline overload. His shoulders ached from recoil absorption. His ears rang with tinnitus that would never fully heal. His throat was raw from breathing gunsmoke. His eyes burned from chemical irritation. But 7 German fighters still threatened his crew, so he kept fighting. 2 more fighters attempted coordinated attack from opposite sides. The ball turret engaged one. Donovan took the other. Both Germans broke off without achieving firing position. The pattern was becoming clear now. Individual fighters couldn't penetrate the defensive fire. But the Germans were learning, adapting. The next wave would be different. It came as a mass attack. All 7 remaining fighters, including the damaged one, dove simultaneously from multiple vectors. Overwhelming force. If even 2 or 3 got through to firing position, they could inflict crippling damage on the Lady Liberty. Donovan made a decision that would later be studied in tactical analysis courses. Instead of trying to engage all attackers, he focused entirely on disrupting their coordination again. He aimed not at the fighters themselves, but at the spaces between them, the zones where their attack timing existed. Sustained fire. Continuous stream. He locked his trigger down and swept the turret across the attack vectors, creating a curtain of bullets that the Germans would have to fly through to reach firing position. The gun barrels glowed red now, visible even in daylight. Temperature warnings flashed on his panel. The weapons were dangerously overheated. Another 30 seconds of firing and they would jam permanently or possibly even cook off remaining ammunition in catastrophic malfunction. Donovan ignored the warnings and kept firing. 3 more Germans fell. 1-2 direct hits. 2 from collision avoidance maneuvers that went wrong in the chaos. The remaining 4 fighters, their attack completely disrupted, scattered. 2 turned east, fleeing toward German airfields. 2 climbed, gaining altitude to reassess, but they didn't attack again. The will was broken, the formation destroyed, the psychological edge lost. Donovan released his trigger. Silence descended, shocking in its suddenness after minutes of continuous gunfire. The smell of burnt metal and cordite filled the turret so thickly he could barely breathe. His ammunition counter showed less than 300 rounds remaining. The intercom exploded with voices. Crew members shouting, cheering, asking what just happened. The pilot's voice cut through the chaos. Donovan's status report. Donovan took a breath, coughed from the smoke. Tail position operational. 12 confirmed enemy fighters destroyed or driven off. Approximately 300 rounds remaining. Guns are overheated but functional. Silence on the intercom for 3 seconds. Then the pilot's voice returned, quiet with something that might have been awe. Copy that. Good work, Sergeant. The bomber formation continued toward Berlin. No other fighter attacks developed. The Luftwaffe had learned a harsh lesson. This formation was different. This crew was dangerous. Better to find easier targets. The Lady Liberty dropped its bombs on the Erkner industrial complex with precision. 300 tons of high explosives from the entire formation obliterated factories, warehouses, and infrastructure. Intelligence later estimated the raid set back German aircraft engine production by 3 months. Not a single bomber was lost to enemy fighters during the entire mission. 1830 hours, March 6, 1944, Thurlow Air Base, England. The B-17 Lady Liberty touched down on the rain-slicked runway with damaged landing gear that sent sparks flying from the tarmac. The hydraulic systems, partially destroyed by German cannon fire during the mission, barely held together long enough for the pilot to bring the massive bomber to a stop. Emergency vehicles raced alongside as the aircraft rolled to its parking position. Ground crew members ran forward before the engines even shut down. Sergeant Michael Donovan remained in the tail turret for a full minute after landing. His body wouldn't move, not from injury, but from complete physical exhaustion. His legs had gone numb from more than 4 hours compressed in the cramped position. His hands remained locked in claw-like grip positions, muscles cramped from holding the gun controls. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. The crew chief climbed into the tail section and physically helped extract Donovan from the turret. His legs collapsed when his feet touched solid ground. Two mechanics caught him before he fell. They helped him sit on the tarmac, back against the landing gear while he waited for circulation to return to his limbs. Around him, the rest of the crew emerged from the Lady Liberty, each man dealing with the aftermath of combat in their own way. Some laughed with manic energy. Some remained silent and pale. The bombardier vomited behind the tailwheel. The navigator sat on the wing, staring at nothing, hands shaking. The pilot, Captain Anderson, walked around the aircraft, inspecting damage. The tail section was riddled with holes from 20mm cannon shells. How many, he couldn't immediately count. Maybe 40, maybe 60. The tail turret itself showed impact marks where German fire had come within inches of killing Donovan. The plexiglass viewport had 3 cracks radiating from impact points. Inside the turret, the twin machine guns sat silent, barrels still faintly glowing, metal warped from heat stress. They would never fire again. The thermal damage was too severe. Complete replacement would be necessary. Captain Anderson climbed up to where Donovan sat. He extended a hand. Donovan took it, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. No words seemed adequate. Finally, Anderson spoke. "The intelligence officer is going to want to debrief you, personally, in detail." Donovan nodded. His voice came out hoarse from breathing gun smoke. "Yes, sir. What you did up there." Anderson paused, searching for words. "I've been flying combat missions for 18 months. I've seen a lot of gunners, good ones, great ones. What you did was something else entirely. Just did my job, sir." "No." Anderson shook his head firmly. "You rewrote the job." The debriefing lasted 3 hours. The intelligence officer, Major William Thompson, went through the engagement second by second, asking for details about angles, distances, timing, ammunition expenditure. Other crew members corroborated the account. Gun camera footage was reviewed. The images showed clearly what happened. 12 Bf-109s entering attack formation. Donovan's tracer fire visible even at extreme range. The formation disruption. The fighters falling. The attack collapsing. Thompson sat back in his chair when the debrief concluded. He'd filled 11 pages of notes. "Sergeant Donovan," he said slowly, "you fired approximately 1,800 rounds in approximately 4 minutes. You achieved 12 confirmed victories. You violated every established protocol for ammunition conservation and fire discipline." Donovan braced for reprimand. Instead, Thompson smiled. "And you might have just shown us how to win this war." The report went up the chain of command with unprecedented speed. Within 48 hours, it reached the desk of Major General James Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force. Doolittle himself, a legendary pilot and innovator, recognized immediately what Donovan's actions represented. Not just individual heroics, but a fundamental tactical evolution. March 13, 1944, 8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe. Doolittle convened an emergency meeting of his senior staff. On the table, bomber loss statistics from the past 6 months. The numbers painted a grim picture. Average loss rate, 8.3% per mission. 4 missions with heavy fighter opposition, losses sometimes exceeded 15%. At these rates, entire bomb groups were being destroyed and reconstituted every few months. Crew survival rates for completing the required 25 mission tours stood at approximately 30%, unsustainable. That was the word Doolittle used. Then he presented Donovan's mission report. The room fell silent as he read through the engagement details. When he finished, he asked a simple question. "How many bombers did the 306th Bomb Group lose on this mission?" "0, sir," his chief of staff responded. "How many in the entire Berlin strike force?" 4, sir, but none to fighter attack. All to flak." Doolittle let that sink in. Then he made his decision. "Gentlemen, we're changing doctrine. Effective immediately." The new directive, officially titled Aggressive Early Engagement Protocols for Bomber Defensive Fire, represented a complete reversal of previous policy. Gunners were now authorized, even encouraged, to open fire at ranges up to 2,000 yards. Emphasis shifted from marksmanship to disruption. Ammunition loadouts increased by 40%. Fire discipline requirements were relaxed. But policy change meant nothing without training. Someone needed to teach the new tactics to hundreds of gunners across dozens of bomb groups. They chose Donovan. March 20, 1944. Donovan received new orders. Temporary reassignment from combat operations to training duties. His mission: develop and deliver a curriculum teaching aggressive defensive fire tactics to bomber gunners throughout the 8th Air Force. He started with 32 students, volunteers from various squadrons, all experienced gunners who'd flown at least 10 missions, men who understood combat realities, men who could learn and then teach others. The curriculum was unlike any military training program before it. Donovan didn't teach marksmanship. Students already knew how to shoot. Instead, he taught psychology, timing, and aggression. "You're not trying to shoot down every fighter," he explained during the first lecture. "You're trying to make them afraid to attack. Fear is your weapon. Bullets are just the delivery system." He taught them to fire early, disrupting formations before they could coordinate. He taught them to target the spaces between fighters, not the fighters themselves. He taught them to maintain sustained fire even when hit probability was low, because the psychological impact mattered more than kill counts. Most importantly, he taught them to attack instead of defend. The moment you start reacting, he said, you've already lost. Act first, make them react to you. Not everyone passed. Some students couldn't overcome ingrained defensive habits, others lacked the aggression needed. About 30% washed out. But those who completed the program became force multipliers. They returned to their units and immediately began applying Donovan's tactics. Then they trained others. The knowledge spread exponentially through the 8th Air Force. By May 1944, more than 300 gunners had completed Donovan's program or been trained by his graduates. The results appeared in the loss statistics. April 1944, bomber loss rate to fighter attack dropped to 6.8%, May 5.1%, June 4.3%. The numbers continued improving through the summer and fall, but statistics only told part of the story. Captured German documents revealed something even more significant. Luftwaffe fighter pilots reported increasing reluctance to engage American bomber formations. Combat reports described American defensive fire as unexpectedly aggressive and psychologically deterring. German Fighter Command issued new tactical directives emphasizing caution when approaching B-17 and B-24 formations. The psychology had shifted. Bombers were no longer perceived as easy targets, they were threats. The Luftwaffe attempted to adapt. They developed new tactics. Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters, faster and more heavily armored than Bf-109s, took over much of the bomber interception role. Rocket-equipped fighters attacked from beyond machine gun range. Coordination between fighter units improved, but the fundamental dynamic had changed. The window where German fighters dominated Allied daylight bombing operations had closed. Combined with increasing numbers of long-range P-51 Mustang escort fighters, the aggressive defensive tactics made strategic bombing campaigns sustainable. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war ended. Sergeant Michael Donovan had completed 52 combat missions. He'd accumulated 17 confirmed aerial victories, making him one of the highest-scoring gunners in the 8th Air Force. His medals included the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters, Silver Star, Air Medal with 12 clusters, and numerous commendations, but Donovan's personal victory count represented only a tiny fraction of his real impact. His training program had produced 327 gunners who flew thousands of missions. Post-war analysis by Air Force historians estimated that the aggressive fire doctrine contributed to approximately 3,200 crew members surviving missions they statistically should not have survived, 3,200 men who came home, 3,200 families that remained intact, because one tail gunner from Brooklyn decided that established doctrine was wrong. July 1945. Donovan returned to New York. The city threw a parade for returning veterans. Fifth Avenue filled with crowds, confetti falling like snow, bands playing, politicians making speeches. Donovan wore his dress uniform with ribbons and medals. People thanked him for his service. Photographers wanted pictures. A Hollywood studio offered to option his story for a film. He declined. The only thing he wanted was to go home to Brooklyn and forget about the war. But forgetting proved impossible. The memories stayed. The sounds of machine guns firing. The sight of aircraft exploding. The faces of crew members who didn't come back. The weight of knowing that his decisions, his tactics, had saved thousands but also killed dozens of German pilots who were just following orders like he was. He struggled with civilian life. The dock work he'd done before the war felt meaningless now. Loading boxes couldn't compare to the intensity of combat. Nothing in civilian life generated the same adrenaline, the same sense of purpose, the same clarity that came from life or death decisions. Many veterans experienced this. Some turned to alcohol. Some couldn't hold jobs. Some marriages fell apart under the strain. The term post-traumatic stress disorder wouldn't be coined for another 30 years, but the condition was as old as warfare itself. Donovan found salvation in education. The GI Bill provided funding for veterans to attend college. He enrolled in night school while working days as a dockyard supervisor. Mechanical engineering. The same skills that helped him understand machine gun mechanics and ballistics translated well to civilian engineering problems. He graduated in 1949, 4 years of difficult study while working full-time. Boeing hired him immediately. His first assignment, developing improved fire control systems for the new B-50 bomber. His war experience gave him insights that purely civilian engineers lacked. He spent 37 years at Boeing, eventually rising to senior engineer. He worked on B-5 to fire control systems, early cruise missile guidance, and defensive systems for commercial aircraft. He held 14 patents. His name appeared in engineering journals. He trained younger engineers, passing on knowledge earned through both combat and study. He married in 1951. His wife, Margaret, was a librarian he met at the community college where he'd taken night classes. 3 children. 2 daughters and a son, 7 grandchildren eventually. A quiet life in Seattle. Weekend barbecues, little league games, school plays, the ordinary happiness of middle-class American life. Most people in his life didn't know about his war record. He didn't talk about it. When asked, he'd say simply, "I was a gunner on bombers, did my job, came home." Then he'd change the subject. But once a year, every March 6th, he visited the Museum of Flight in Seattle. A restored B-17 sat on display there. He'd spend an hour walking around it, looking at the tail turret, remembering. Museum docents learned not to disturb the older man who came annually to stand silently beside the bomber. Sometimes other veterans recognized him. Word spread slowly through the tight-knit community of B-17 crew members. Men in their 70s and 80s would approach him at air shows or reunions. "You're Donovan," they'd say. "You trained my tail gunner," or "My crew flew the tactics you developed," or simply, "Thank you." He always felt uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just did what made sense," was his standard response. In 1998, the Air Force Historical Foundation invited him to give a lecture at their annual symposium. He was 76 years old, retired, and initially declined, but his wife convinced him. "Those kids studying to be officers need to hear from someone who was actually there," she said. So he went to Washington, D.C. and stood before an auditorium filled with Air Force Academy cadets, active duty officers, and military historians. He told them about March 6, 1944, about the decision to violate doctrine, about what he learned from combat that no training could teach. At the end, a cadet asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Sir, how did you know your tactic would work? Weren't you afraid of being wrong?" Donovan thought for a long moment. "I was terrified of being wrong," he finally said. "But I was more afraid of doing nothing while my friends died." Sometimes courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being so scared you can barely function, but acting anyway because the alternative is worse. Standing ovation, 5 minutes of applause. Later, several cadets approached him for autographs and photos. One of them, a young woman studying to be a pilot, said something that struck him. "Sir, they teach us your doctrine in tactical training, but they never told us it came from one person who just decided to try something different." That moment made him realize something. His story mattered not just as history, but as a lesson about innovation under pressure, about challenging authority when authority is wrong, about trusting your analysis even when it contradicts conventional wisdom. Michael Francis Donovan died on February 14, 2003 at age 81. Heart failure. He passed peacefully in his sleep at home, surrounded by family. His obituary in the Seattle Times ran 6 paragraphs. It mentioned his engineering career, his patents, his family. One sentence referenced his World War II service. He served as a tail gunner in the 8th Air Force and received several commendations for bravery. That was all. 6 words to summarize what he'd accomplished in combat. No mention of the 12 fighters. No mention of changing doctrine. No mention of the thousands of lives saved. But at his funeral, 43 men appeared in vintage leather flight jackets. Veterans in their 70s and 80s, some in wheelchairs, some using walkers, all wearing the insignia of 8th Air Force bomb groups. They came from across the country. They filled an entire section of the church. One of them, an 81-year-old former ball turret gunner named Robert Chen, gave a eulogy. "Mike Donovan saved my life," he said. "Not directly. I never flew on his crew. But in April 1944, he trained the tail gunner on my aircraft. Taught him to shoot first, attack aggressively, make the Germans afraid. We flew 31 missions, came home. I got to have a wife, kids, grandkids, a whole life. All because Mike taught my crewmate how to survive." He paused, looking at Donovan's flag-draped coffin. "Hundreds of us owe him everything, and he never wanted recognition, never sought glory, just wanted us to live." 43 veterans stood silent for 10 seconds. Then, simultaneously, they saluted. For the gunner who changed aerial warfare, for the man who proved that courage means acting despite fear, for the teacher who saved thousands, for Michael Donovan, Brooklyn dock worker, tail gunner, innovator, hero. Today, a Browning M2 machine gun from a B-17 tail turret sits in a display case at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. A small brass plaque reads, "Tail gun from B-17G 306th Bombardment Group Staff Sergeant Michael F." Donovan developed aggressive early engagement tactics that reduced bomber casualties by an estimated 15% during 1944 to 1945 and influenced defensive doctrine for decades. Thousands of visitors pass it every year. Most barely glance at it, but sometimes a veteran stops, reads the plaque, remembers how one man decided the rules were wrong, how he risked everything to prove it, how his courage saved thousands, and how the greatest heroes are often those who never sought to be heroes at all.